Well, I want to thank you all for coming here today to the 2016 Constitution and Citizenship Day lecture sponsored by UMBC. This turnout is fantastic. A couple bits of housekeeping. Again, if you're a student of mine and are here for the extra credit, make sure that on your way out you sign the attendance sheet up front. We have a few pocket constitutions left. There's also up here a handout of a couple of quotes that our guest speaker will be referring to. If you don't have a copy of the handout, I bet one of your neighbors does, and maybe you could share. Any of you need one? All right, great. As you all probably figured out by now, there is food and drink in the back, and you'll have a chance to make another trip through the food line after the talk is over. We'll make sure to have some time for Q&A. We do have the room until 1:30, and so I'm looking forward to a lively discussion after a really interesting talk. And so I'm now going to introduce our guest speaker. It's a real honor and privilege to introduce a friend, a colleague, a mentor of mine. Sanford Levinson holds the W. St. John Garwood and W. St. John Garwood Jr. Centennial Chair in Law at the University of Texas. And he's previously a member of the Department of Politics at Princeton. He's also a professor in the Department of Government at the University of Texas. Levinson is the author of approximately 400 articles, book reviews, or commentaries in both professional and popular journals, and a regular contributor to the excellent legal blog, Organization. He's also written 6 books, including Our Undemocratic Constitution, Where the Constitution Goes Wrong and How We, the People, Can Correct It. And students of mine will get to know that book very well this semester. Most recently, his most recent book is An Argument Open to All, Reading the Federalist in the 21st Century. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Law and Court section of the American Political Science Association in 2010. A member of the American Law Institute, Levinson was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2001. And so it gives me really great pleasure to bring to the podium a friend of mine and a really brilliant constitutional thinker, Sandy Levinson.
Well, I'm very grateful to all who are coming out today. I personally benefited from what is probably an unconstitutional law, that is the law passed by Congress requiring every university that receives federal funds annually to commemorate or celebrate the Constitution. Now, as a matter of fact, courts have not found this unconstitutional, but let me assure you that in terms of standard form argument, it's a bit difficult to understand exactly why Congress has the authority to do this, unless you really do believe the adage, whoever pays the piper can call the tune. It doesn't matter what the tune is. Nonetheless, Constitution Day has been very, very good to me. It means that, thanks to Congress, there is this nationwide group of universities that look for speakers on or around Constitution Day, and I'm always glad to oblige. But let me tell you at the outset that I doubt that I'm exactly what Congress has in mind, because as William has already indicated, simply from reading the title of one of my books, I'm not a big fan of the Constitution. I think it is radically defective, and I am one of the handful of people, and I wish there were more than a handful, who believe that we need a new constitutional convention to talk about and then ultimately draft a constitution that would be more suitable in the 21st century. I think it would clearly be unconstitutional if Congress required that all of the speakers of Constitution Day celebrate the Constitution. That would run afoul of viewpoint discrimination. It may be constitutional, or at least courts might find it constitutional, for Congress to say, well, you have to talk about the Constitution at least once a year, That's content. I'm not invited to talk about other things about the Constitution, but presumably I am free to say what I want about the Constitution. And you will discover along the way some of those things. I want to frame this, though, in the context of a number of quotations. One of them is the beginning of Richard III by William Shakespeare, Now is the winter of our discontent. I think in the United States these days, since this isn't winter, it's not even fall yet, but I think it's fair to say that in the United States currently, it is the winter, spring, summer, and fall of our discontent. That if you look around, one just does not see a nation attacking people. William and I have had the pleasure, at least I've had the great pleasure of collaborating with him on a couple of articles. He is the one who knows how to analyze data. That is not my strong suit. But I am extremely interested in polls and what polls might show. So let's take one standard measure of the direction of the country. Do you think the country is going in the right direction or the wrong direction? There are many political scientists, and I think practicing politicians who think that's an important measure, obviously, of overall confidence, and that probably translates in a variety of complicated ways to support for the people running the country, and perhaps even support for the basic political system. If you believe the country is going the wrong direction, then it would be at least a little bit surprising if you were full of faith in the people running the country. It would be less surprising, for a variety of reasons that I'll talk about, that you thought, well, the problem is in our leadership, it's not the political system. But some people might, in fact, decide that, look, it's not only fill in the blank with your unfavorite political leaders, whether it's Barack Obama or Mitch McConnell, or Harry Reid, or the number of other candidates to be demonized in terms of political leadership, but some people, let's say, might even generalize this to the overall political system. So, in any event, the current direction of country polls are not very encouraging. If one looks only at a poll taken by the magazine The Economist, and let me assure you there are dozens of polls. I'm not cherry picking in the sense of looking for that best serves my argument, but there are other polls and they show modest variation. I picked The Economist because it's the most recent poll, and because The Economist, I think, is a widely respected publication, though that might not translate to the fact that they really and truly run the very best poll. William would know much more about that than I do. In any event, in the most recent poll taken between September 10th and September 13th, that is, this past week, 24%, less than a quarter of the country, of those polled, thought we were going in the right direction. 67%, that is slightly more than 2/3, thought we were heading in the wrong direction. What's interesting to me is that the previous poll, taken literally a week earlier, showed that 28% of the country thought we were going in the right direction, and 62% thought we were going in the wrong direction. Now, as I'm sure William and other political scientists here would be the first to point out, this change might simply be noise. It might simply be margin of error. But we all know from reading the daily newspaper the fact that Donald Trump has cut into Hillary Clinton's lead in the last week is taken literally as front page news. It's not treated simply as statistical noise. It is viewed as really, really significant that she's lost 4 points and he's gained 4 points. I really have no idea whether it's so significant. I'm quite sure it's not so significant as the headline writers are making it, but it's certainly being treated as a very, very significant piece of data indeed. So let me point out that we've seen the same move in the last week with regard to overall confidence. And maybe that even helps to explain the shift with regard to Clinton and Trump, that insofar as Trump has managed, plausibly or not, to brand himself as an insurgent, the less confidence people have in the direction of the country, the more you might be willing to vote for the bull in the china shop in order really to disrupt things, because why would you want to vote for somebody who, rightly or wrongly, that's not the topic of today's talk, is viewed as more emblematic of the status quo in terms of the overall political system. So that's one measure that I find of interest. Let me assure you that these numbers don't represent a sudden tectonic plate shift from confidence in the direction of the country over the last several years to this rather depressing lack of confidence in the future. The numbers might be getting a bit more ominous, but they're congruent with overall the numbers for the last several years. Now let's look at Congress. Approval of Congress or not. The most recent poll, again, is that of The Economist, and between the 10th and 13th, and what they showed is that 10% of the population approved of Congress, 80%, or I'm sorry, 71% disapproved of Congress. So on the assumption that, I can't do an exact count of the House right now, but on the assumption that there are about 60 or 65 people here, because I know how many copies of the Constitution there were, that would predict, unless you're wildly different from the American population as a whole, that somewhere between 5 and 8 of you might approve Congress. Most of you would disapprove, and a few of you would have no opinion about Congress one way or the other. But you might be in equilibrium. If we were talking about the Supreme Court, the odds are that most of you, though only by a relatively narrow majority, would disapprove of the Supreme Court. And this is really an historical anomaly. Usually the Supreme Court scores the highest of the 3 major branches. That's no longer true. The Supreme Court right now has the approval, I think, of somewhere between about 42 and 46%, and somewhat over 50% disapprove of the Supreme Court. Again, these figures have to be analyzed carefully, because it's not the case, unlike presidential approval rates. Right now, President Obama has a 51% approval rate. That could be viewed simply as a proxy for a political party. That if you're a Democrat, the odds are very, very high that you approve of President Obama. If you're a Republican, the odds are very, very high that you don't. But it ought to be quite obvious that approval rates for Congress and approval rates for the Supreme Court really don't map on to political party or partisanship. For every Republican who is furious at the Supreme Court for not overturning Roe versus Wade or for upholding Obamacare, there are certainly an equal number of Democrats who are furious at the Supreme Court for gutting the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and for a number of other decisions that liberals would regard as egregious. Similarly, with Congress, if the approval rate is 10%, it is wildly implausible to view that as a proxy for your political party sympathies. It means that if Democrats and Republicans these days are united by nothing else, they are united by contempt for Congress. Even if, as I've already suggested, the specific bill of particulars will almost certainly differ depending on where you are in the political spectrum. But one of the things that I'm sure is true is that wherever you are on the political spectrum, whether you are liberal, moderate, conservative, radical, or paleoconservative, reactionary, anarcho-conservative, you don't have any genuine confidence that the national government will respond to whatever you believe to be the most important problems facing the country. Now, depending where you are on the spectrum, you'll have different candidates for most important problems facing the country. The more liberal you are, the more likely you are to believe that global warming, climate change, may very well be the most important single problem facing the country and the world, and nobody can believe that Congress is stepping up to the plate to meet that problem. If you're conservative, you may believe that getting control of entitlement spending, particularly Social Security and Medicare, are the most important problems. Nobody can really believe that the national government is responding effectively to the cost problems of either of those. If you're a centrist, you might believe, look, it really is time to do something about immigration, even though liberals and conservatives will have different answers as to what there is to do. But the Senate passed a relatively bipartisan immigration bill in, I think, 2010 or 2011, and